And the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 15739 in the name of Murdo Fraser on protection of park home residents. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate, please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Murdo Fraser to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking all members who signed my motion from across the chamber, allowing it to be debated this afternoon on what is an issue clearly of interest to many members. And can I start by paying tribute to SCOPRA, the Scottish Confederation of Park Home Residents Association, for the excellent campaigning and lobbying work they've done on behalf of their members, and in particular reference Gordon Morrison, who's the chair, who's in the gallery with us this afternoon. And then also acknowledge the work done by Colin Beattie, MSP, who previously chaired a cross-party group on park homes, of which I was a member, which was helpful in getting some changes done at that particular point. To start by putting the issue into a little bit of context, park homes are a growing component in the housing market in Scotland, with an estimated 100 park home residential sites across the country, being the home to more than 8,000 residents. A park home is what is effectively classed as a temporary structure, or what is sometimes better known as a chalet or a lodge, where the owner of the property pays a ground rent to lease the land on which the structure sits. These properties are not, however, insubstantial structures. The average cost of such homes varies between £90,000 and £250,000, and they provide a high standard of comfortable accommodation with all the amenities of a more permanent building. These park home developments tend to be situated in scenic rural areas, often with an attractive outlook, and have become a popular option, mainly for retirees or those looking to downsize, to be part of a community of like-minded individuals, to reduce their maintenance and energy costs, and don't have to worry about maintaining a large garden. And we're seeing more and more of these lodge developments spring up, and their existence allows larger family homes to come on the market and be available for those who need the additional accommodation. So park homes are a very positive development, but unfortunately there are a number of issues that have arisen impacting the purchasers of park homes, which has led me to the conclusion that the law around the purchase and occupancy of these properties needs to be updated and reviewed. So we have cases of disputes between park home purchasers and site owners going unresolved, residents feeling in some cases threatened and intimidated by unscrupulous developers. Unlike the purchase of a permanent residence, the acquisition of a park home does not involve a formal conveyance, and accordingly many purchasers do not involve solicitors in the purchase, even when parting with substantial sums of cash, a situation which can leave them vulnerable to being exploited. At present, the purchaser of a park home has the right to be given a written statement, which is a contract between the site owner and the resident and is enforceable in law by both parties. It will set out the details of the location and size of the pitch on which the home sits, the annual pitch fee which is payable, which typically rises each year in accordance with RPI, although I know the Scottish Government has plans to change that to CPI, and the rules of the park. And despite this requirement, in practice, we know that there are park home owners who are not given a written statement, or where its terms are not met by the site owner. One of the most concerning situations I have come across relates to the park home development at Bendicky, just outside Blairgowrie in Perthshire. In March 2022, Heritage Park Estates Limited was given planning consent for 43 lodges and 10 glamping pods on a former poultry farm development, with the planning consent making it clear that the units would be used for holiday accommodation only. In August 2023, the Advertising Standards Authority ruled that the site owners had misled the public into believing the homes could be used as permanent residences, and a number of individuals purchased them on that basis. Roy and Susan Robertson are a couple in precisely that situation. They sold their family home to purchase a park home at Bendicky Park, believing this would become somewhere they could spend their retirement. The properties there were advertised under the strapline, "Your dream home built your way." And a prominent bullet point in the sales material stated the park was open 365 days a year and made reference to the units being and I quote, homes, unquote. It was only after they parted with their funds did the Robertsons realise, too late, that the planning permission for the property restricted it only to holiday use. They, along with a number of other residents, have now been served with planning enforcement notices, which require them to find a permanent residence elsewhere, failing which they will face eviction. As might be imagined, this is an extremely distressing situation for those affected, leaving them to have to apply to the local council for accommodation elsewhere and be treated as potentially homeless. Now, I have raised this issue with Perth and Ross Council and with Trading Standards. Trading Standards were pursuing it with the company that did the development. That company has now gone into liquidation and has been transferred to another property, of course, which cannot be pursued, which is very unfortunate. I see Graham Day wanting to make an intervention. I'll give way.
Graham Day.
Can I appreciate Mother Fraser take the intervention, also for raising this very, very important issue in Parliament. I don't disagree with the thrust of what he's saying at all, but I wonder if he would agree with me that in some instances local authorities could be making more active use of existing powers that they have at their disposal. I'm thinking, for example, of the fit and proper person test in relation to those operating these sites, because that would afford better protection for park homeowners, at least in the short term.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank Graham Day for that intervention? I think he makes a very reasonable point about the enforcement of existing powers. I would say in relation to Benedictine Park, that was not treated as a caravan site, and therefore the fit and proper person test did not apply in that particular case. But there are other cases where it will apply, and that is where local authorities have a legitimate role to intervene, and in some cases could be doing that more energetically. So I think that's a reasonable point. Let me just raise briefly, Presiding Officer, other concerns that have been raised with me affecting Park Home residents. Typically, utility costs are paid centrally by the site owner and billed back to the tenants, giving rise to concerns about additional charges and profiteering. In some cases, residents who wish to alter or extend their homes or carry out landscaping work, such as installing decking or patios, are only permitted to have this done by the authorised contractor of the site owner, and that done, therefore, at inflated cost. And where a park owner sells their property, typically 10% of the sale price is taken by the site owner as a fee. And residents who are elderly or have a disability are not eligible for local authority grants for improvements and adaptations because park homes are not treated as permanent buildings. Now, as the Minister knows, I've put forward amendments to the Housing Bill, which we're meeting to discuss next week. I think it would be very reasonable to extend the existing law on adaptations to allow those living in a park home, which is their permanent residence, to be eligible for these grants. And the other important amendment which I would like to progress is in relation to the resolution of disputes, because at the moment, where park homeowners are in dispute with the site owner, their only remedy is to go to the Sheriff Court. And as we know, that's a very expensive and bureaucratic process. Civil legal aid is almost impossible to achieve, and trying to find lawyers with a knowledge and specialisation in this area is immensely difficult, which is why SCOPRA have been pushing for the resolution of disputes to be moved to the first-tier tribunal, which deals with other housing issues which would not require the same level of expense nor the involvement necessarily of solicitors, and that's something I've put forward as an amendment. So I've had a very good engagement with the Minister, as has SCOPRA in the past. I know he's very sympathetic to some of the concerns that have been raised. And I hope that this members' debate will see a recognition by the Scottish Government of the need for changes in the law in this area to ensure, Presiding Officer, we protect some of the most vulnerable in our society. And I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Mr Fraser. Could I please remind all members who are seeking to speak in the debate to check that they have, in fact, pressed the request to speak button. And could I now call Colin Beattie to be followed by Oliver Mundell. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be speaking today to address an issue that affects many of my constituents in Midlothian, North and Musselburgh, and thousands more across Scotland, our park home residents, many of whom are not receiving the support they deserve, and I thank Murdo Fraser for bringing this motion forward for debate. Back in 2011, when I was first elected, I convened the cross-party group on park homes, which was formed to manage changes to legislation to correct anomalies which were seen as being unfair and unreasonable to residents. This was achieved successfully, But now it seems that these changes did not go far enough, and both legislation and enforcement needs to be revisited. Many of my constituents residing in park homes are elderly or retired and are almost consistently treated unfairly by their site owners. I've already said that the Scottish Government has taken steps to improve conditions for park home residents, but I believe more can and should be done to provide further protections for this vulnerable group. We're all too aware of the energy crisis that's gripped our constituents' lives as prices continue to rise. It's hard to believe that some park home residents do not have fair and transparent access to utilities which they pay for. If utilities are purchased from the site owner as part of their written agreement, then no specific charges can be identified. This even bypasses Ofgem's maximum price limits, which are there to protect customers. This lack of transparency leaves park home residents open to exploitation. A simple step our government could take is ensuring residents have clarity and openness in how their utility bills are calculated. Site owners must be constrained from profiteering from their residents' energy use. Unfortunately, this is not the only common issue that residents face. The restrictions to qualify for home adaptations grants has left many in the most appalling circumstances. I'd like to share the story of one constituent who was given the most heartbreaking news. They had just had their second leg amputated, and as they lived in a mobile home, they did not qualify for financial help to install home adaptations. This is per the Housing Scotland Act, which states any home which isn't a permanent structure does not qualify. It's outrageous that anyone can be left trapped and isolated following a life-altering illness, and we must close this glaring loophole. Following this correspondence, I reached out to the Scottish Government, who assured me they are conducting a review into the adaptation system. I look forward to the outcome of this review, and I hope it will bring welcome news to park residents across the country. It's also vital that park home residents are included in wider discussions. Their voices must be heard. Currently, this can be done via residents' associations that allow residents to organise and create a dialogue with their site owners. And I was pleased to meet with the Scottish Federation of Park Home Residents Associations this morning, where we discussed the importance of this. Residents' associations are very important, and they can assist residents in creating their own associations. However, my constituents inform me that some site owners still refuse to consult with resident associations, and cooperation cannot be enforced. I would encourage the Scottish Government to investigate where the legislation can be tightened to ensure greater cooperation between site owners and residents. Simple mutual respect seems to be lacking. Deputy Presiding Officer, park home residents are not asking for special treatment. They're asking for fairness, stability and the ability to join their home without unnecessary hardship. By working together, we can ensure that every resident, every one of our constituents, can live with dignity and security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Beattie. I now call Oliver Mundell to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Mr Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by paying tribute to my colleague Murdo Fraser for securing this important debate today and for shining a light on what is often an undervalued and overlooked part of Scotland's housing landscape. SCOPRA do a really great job, but they are working without the resource and on an entirely voluntary basis to make the case on behalf of thousands of residents. I was keen to speak in the debate myself from my constituency experience over the last 8.5 years to give the voice to the legitimate concerns of local residents of park homes who are often left without a voice or adequate mechanisms to address the unfairness and discrimination they face. And I'd say to the Minister, those concerns are such, I actually don't want to give a number of the specific examples today because people are in such fear of the relationship they have with park home owners and the control they have over their home. That wouldn't be acceptable in any other part of the housing landscape. And while over-regulation is something that concerns me in relation to so many other sectors, the situation here is quite the opposite. Too often the park home sector feels like the Wild West, where the normal rules don't apply. And while I know that there are some diligent site owners out there that are doing the right thing, too many operate to a standard that is unacceptable. And they have identified this as a weak area in housing policy where they can exploit vulnerable people, often older and disabled people, and use them as a cash cow. And I'm deeply troubled by the charges imposed, as Colin Beattie's mentioned, for electricity usage, and the lack of transparency around how these costs are calculated, and the inability of residents to control these costs. How can it be right that households who are among some of the most vulnerable, and many, as Murdo Fraser has said, have moved specifically to try and make their home more affordable, be totally excluded from the consumer protections that the rest of us enjoy? Equally, I've seen a number of issues with things like water pressure on sites, again, where there's no oversight. And there are the well-known and well-rehearsed issues around exploitative rates for changing ownership and the excessive and inflated site fees. All too often, park home owners feel like they are being treated like second-class citizens, and they're not, as other members have mentioned, given the full facts before signing on the dotted line. But, Presiding Officer, it's not just site owners themselves who give rise to concern. Local authorities, as has already been referenced, are not doing their bit, and too often take a hands-off approach when it comes to their statutory and other duties in relation to these sites. In my experience, they often opt for the path of least resistance rather than stand up for local residents, adopting a tick-box approach to site licensing and showing little interest when it comes to ensuring that site designs are fit for purpose. How can it be right that roads and planning officials have such limited powers to root out bad practice in this space? How can sizeable residential developments be allowed to be built and operated without proper roads, drainage and lighting? Then we come on to another area of bad practice that's already been referenced, the mis-selling of homes on non-residential sites. I first became aware of the scale of this issue during COVID, when many non-residential sites were asked to close in line with regulations, and my inbox was flooded with people being asked to move out of what they considered to be their main residence to go to other homes that didn't exist. And thankfully, the Scottish Government stepped in that instance, but I think there is a need for a more serious rethink with regards to the prevalence of this practice. Local authorities shouldn't be collecting council tax, registering people to vote and providing other services to these individuals on the one hand, and then claim to not know about them on the other. And as I close, Presiding Officer, I'd want to use this opportunity to urge the Minister to back Murdo Fraser's amendments and get behind cross-party efforts to make sure that people are treated with fairness and that they're given the same rights as other homeowners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mandel. I now call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Mr Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I join members in congratulating Murdo Fraser on bringing this issue to the Chamber. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss it, as this is not an issue which has been raised frequently. The most recent estimation from the Scottish Confederation of Park Home Residents show there are around 8,500 people living in park homes and 100 parks in Scotland. Park homes can be used as both temporary holiday homes or as a permanent residence, which seems to be growing in recent years as an option for older people. The regulation of park home sites sits between permanent and temporary residents, and the different system of rents, ownership and licenses, which is outlined in the motion. Where residents own the home but not the land can cause issues. For example, when you go on to the website of the Scottish Confederation of Park Home Residents Association, you will find tips for living in park homes, membership costs, and big red font that says warning notice, followed by a disclaimer telling those wanting to buy a holiday home to seek professional advice. This is because of the issues of residents being missold park homes on the false pretense that they were permanent dwellings, when in fact licensing designates them as a holiday homes. This has resulted in members of the public, often those newly retired, facing homelessness, despite being advertised a home for life. This holes in regulation also extends to energy, like in 2022, where Park Homes residents were initially left out of arrangements for government support on energy bills, and a separate scheme had to be established. And in recent years, following storms, residents have been without power for days on end, some stating they feel like they are forgotten about by energy companies. I note the call in the motion for Park Homes residents to be given access to their housing adoptions. I am often contacted by constituents who struggle to get adopted housing in regular homes, and hear how even for them long waits are so worrying. So I cannot imagine how it must feel getting older and more frail, but have no access to housing adoptions due to regularity issues. Given these homes are being used as a permanent residence, similar to a rental property, it should be considered how adoptions can be made. I again congratulate Murdo Fraser on bringing this issue to the Chamber. I understand the Scottish Government is considering reviewing the licensing regime for park homes, and I look forward to hearing that Minister says to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. I now call Mark Ruskell to be followed by Willie Rennie. Mr Ruskell.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Murdo Fraser for bringing forward this important issue to the Chamber. As a fellow representative of Mid-Scotland and Fife, I'm aware that park homes are a serious issue. It was very good to meet Gordon Morrison from ScotPro at lunchtime and absolutely support further reforms in this area. It is clear that as we continue to face a housing crisis in Scotland, especially in rural Scotland, with increased demand for homes outstripping supply, that park homes will continue to meet a housing need. But I agree with Oliver Mundell. It really feels like a Wild West right now, Minister, in this area, and further reforms are really, really needed. And of course, housing is a fundamental human right, and everyone in Scotland deserves to have a warm, safe, secure home, including those living in park homes. But this doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Perth and Kinross Council have issued 6 enforcement notices to lodge owners at Bendochi due to lodges being used as permanent residences when the original planning was not for this purpose. But these units were clearly advertised as homes, open year-round, arguably missold as permanent residences. And now, of course, those residents are facing uncertainty over their housing security due to those misleading adverts from a company that has now been liquidated. I'll take Mr.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. Does he agree that it's wrong that often it's the individual residents who are more likely to face enforcement from local authorities than some of the park owners themselves?
Mark Ruskell.
Yes, I feel that there's an injustice there, a very clear injustice, and I think it's now up for the government to consider what amendments can be brought forward to the housing bill to really, and perhaps in other legislation as well, to rectify this. We talk a lot in this chamber about the needs of tenants. These are a particular type of tenants in Scotland that are facing a particular type of issues, and I think we need to understand it better and consider the options for reform. I think all these issues are really concerning, particularly for the most vulnerable residents of these parks. And I think we've already heard examples of that. People who are in quite impossible situations, people often elderly, they maybe have a disability, and yet they're facing all of this stress. And I think what's happened in Blairgowrie and elsewhere across Scotland really highlights that weakness in current legislation around park homes and ownership rights, and shows that unscrupulous companies can missell to consumers seemingly without any consequences. We've heard also about the issues around energy, and Deputy Presiding Officer and others will know that following Storm Owen, residents in Fordell Gardens in Fife were left without power for nearly 48 hours, but they found themselves ineligible for emergency aid from Scottish Power, which meant that residents had to either pay out of pocket for alternative accommodation or brave the cold until power was restored. And in this current cost of living crisis, this is completely unacceptable. from the utility companies, and it really does beg the question why those residing in park homes are not, as a point of principle, point of justice here, not eligible for the same protection of those living in traditional dwellings. I do recognise that there is a really wider housing crisis in rural areas, and that there is arguably in some areas a real imbalance between holiday accommodation, private and social rent and owner occupation, and we really need to address this. I do see this in Perth and Kinross and elsewhere as well. Older people need the ability to downsize. They need the ability to live in smaller lodge-style units for rent with a surrounding supportive community, and possibly even co-housing as well, which brings a huge amount of benefits. That's the model that many people want and need, but it doesn't fit easily with the park home model, and it doesn't fit easily with existing planning policy as well. So I would ask the Government to consider how we address that need, which is really at the heart of this issue. The need that park home residents and many people have in Scotland for a secure and peaceful place to retire free from anxiety. And I think the points that have been made about reform are well made, including perhaps the need for a statutory tribunal process. It's clear that these residents' rights are not being protected right now. Murdo Fraser's amendments to the Housing Bill give strong food for thought. We'll consider those, but I do look forward to working on a cross-party basis with other colleagues on this going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. I now call Willie Rennie to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. Mr Rennie.
I think Oliver Mundell actually got it in a nub. He said about the owners of these caravans, of these mobile homes, are feeling the ones that they're vulnerable rather than the owners of the sites. And that's the crux of the problem here. I've got Ansmuir Park near Ladybank in my constituency, and I have to say that the owners of the site have been appalling. The maintenance of the site, issues around drainage and electricity have been frequently reported to me and my colleague Wendy Chamberlain. The site is split. It's a holiday park, part residential park, but the poor relationship between the owners of the mobile homes and the owners of the site are long-standing. And I think it's important to call them out when they have got poor practice, because I think it's important that they improve their practice for the future, because it is a common feature, as we've heard today, about issues around about mis-selling. Is it a holiday home or is it a residence? Are people staying there all year round? Do they understand that before they purchase their home? Poor maintenance issues, issues about distribution of the statements. Frequently, they don't receive the statements. But also when there's power cuts, as Mark Ruskell has just alighted on, that they are considered as a commercial operator rather than individual residents, and the vulnerability of them is not highlighted within the power company's system. So I pay credit to Murdo Fraser, and I was really impressed with the authoritative way that he set out in great detail and knowledge about the issue, but also the clear dedication that he's got to try and resolve this issue. My experience going back to Ladybank was that we took this up with the local authority, and they were very passive. They were obviously under-resourced, which is a frequency with many local authorities, but they were passive in terms of the application of the licensing process, but also the original planning process as well. And I can understand they've got many challenges across the piece, but there's clearly incomplete powers, but also under-resourced licensing teams. And that's why I think Murdo Fraser's point is valid. I think we do need to be looking for a tribunal process to make sure there is a vehicle for residents to be able to, with an affordable price, to raise their concerns through an official channel, rather than the ramshackle processes that we have at present. I think that may drive changes in the wider sector. I think they may improve the process. Even if the tribunal is not used very often, it will bring some discipline and order into the application of this. And I understand this tribunal process does get utilised. The provision is there within England, and therefore I believe it should be applied here as well. So I think it's important. I think it's an incredibly important issue. A lot of people are feeling very vulnerable just now. There are many cases that I hear about where people are living in what are actually holiday homes, but they don't receive bin collections, they're not on the voting register, and they don't pay the council tax. Now, all of them are living on the edge of society. They think they're in their homes, but they are not officially in residential homes, and that's where the nub of the problem is. So I welcome the fact that the government are doing a review of this sector. I think it needs radical change, because my experience so far is that it's wholly inadequate.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. I now call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Douglas Lumsden. Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Murdo Fraser on securing this debate and thank the Scottish Confederation of Park Home Residents Associations for the briefing and many of the 70+ residents of Bruce Court, Willow Park and Millglen Lodges in my constituency who shared their views in advance of today's debate. Park homes are a growing and welcome component of our housing stock, and residents are typically retired looking to downsize and enjoy their retirement amongst like-minded people in a peaceful and attractive setting. But in the midst of a housing emergency, park homes can offer a low-cost way of expanding their housing stock while freeing up traditional brick and mortar homes for young families. Yet it's clear from today's debate that there is strong cross-party support that action needs to be implemented by the Scottish Government to protect park home owners. Residents own their home, but not the land it's built on. They don't enjoy the rights owners or renters of brick and mortar homes have. Instead, any recourse in the event of a dispute is covered by consumer rights legislation or the park home licensing regime. The Mobile Homes Act 1983 requires that site owners must give the proposed park home occupier a written statement setting out the rights and responsibilities of both parties and other relevant information. Yet there's no standardisation of this important document. Some residents may not even have been given one, and there's no independent register of ownership. The licence fee doesn't cover the cost of any enforcement action, with the local authority instead having to recover this from the business operating the park home. I have constituents who believe this has held our local authority back from taking enforcement action where necessary, because site owners can refuse to communicate with residents associations and individuals, making it difficult to resolve issues and causing significant frustration. There are also concerns about the lack of designated park managers to handle issues when site owners are away, leaving residents without support during emergencies. Scoffer and individual constituents question whether the fit and proper person test is weeding out unscrupulous site owners, and we've heard from colleagues of a number of alleged such owners. Site maintenance and safety is a common complaint, a prominent example being site owners allegedly failing to spread grit during cold weather, despite being asked to by vulnerable elderly residents. Such safety measures should be included in licensing conditions to ensure compliance. And as colleagues from across the chamber have touched on, adaptations to help people with disabilities exclude park homes as they're not a permanent structure. This despite more park home residents being older and therefore more likely to have mobility issues. Residents are concerned about the high cost of utilities like gas and electricity, which are often metered by park owners, and overcharging is alleged and residents feel vulnerable to exploitation. The Office of Gas and Electricity Markets limits the maximum price gas and electricity can be resold by site owners to residents. However, this limit doesn't apply when an inclusive charge is made for accommodation, for example, where a park home pitch fee includes all amenities or for the resale of liquefied petroleum gas. And when the previous UK Government awarded households £400 off their energy bills, park homes were excluded, and Patricia Gibson MP had to take the matter to the floor of the House of Commons. Residents have also difficulties adding an electric car charging point to their park homes. Regarding the 10% commission on sales, in days gone by, the site owner often assisted in selling a park home, acting much like an estate agent and partly justifying the fee. Park home managers consider this commission important, arguing for its role supporting site facilities. However, the near unanimous feedback from residents is negative, seeing this commission as more like a feudal levy. Often residents are opposed in principle, considering it unfair, or because they don't see a commensurate investment in site infrastructure. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has pledged to review site licensing before this session ends. I trust the Minister has taken on board concerns raised today by colleagues from across the Chamber and will indeed progress changes to better protect residents, ensuring park homes remain a viable and attractive housing option for our elderly population.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I call Douglas Lumsden to be followed by Douglas Ross. Mr Lumsden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Murdo Fraser for bringing this debate today. And I must admit that this was not a subject I was aware of until I signed Murdo Fraser's motion. I was then contacted by constituents in Aberdeenshire to meet with them, and I spent a morning with park home owners understanding more of the issues that they faced. And I must say, what struck me when I went to visit was the sense of community. Everyone seemed to know everyone else in the park, and I guess that we shouldn't be surprised by that, because that's the whole idea of these parks, a community of like-minded individuals who have their own space in the countryside and also reduced maintenance. And the first point I want to make is that no one should think of these homes in any less way than a home made of bricks and mortar. We have heard of the term mobile homes in today's debate, but that does not do most of these homes justice. These homes do not move about, and to be covered by just mobile home legislation, I feel, is completely wrong. These homes are prefabricated homes, and the homeowners deserve the equivalent rights of other homeowners. I heard of homeowners not being given an adequate power supply to their homes, meaning things like the oven couldn't be on at the same time as the heating, but the site owner wouldn't do anything about it. I heard stories of the local council asking for improvements to be made at the site, but no evidence that the local council were actually checking that improvement conditions of a licence were being made, but instead taking the owner's word for it, no doubt due to limited budget, as we heard from Willie Rennie. I heard stories of site owners dismissing owners' concerns out of hand, and the owners only having a limited or expensive course of action. And, Presiding Officer, this is not good enough, and we cannot just ignore these legitimate concerns. And that is why, on the back of my meeting, I submitted a number of questions to the devolved government on this subject, and the response to these questions was pathetic, to say the least. I asked how residents' legal rights could be improved and what new regulations are being considered to enhance the protection of park home residents. I was told that the priority at present is work to change the basis of pitch fee operating from RPI to CPI. That, Presiding Officer, is an embarrassment. The only thing the Minister thinks should change is the price rise mechanism. Nothing about improving legal rights and giving these residents more protection. I asked the Minister if there are any plans to establish an independent body to oversee and regulate park home sites. Again, the devolved government would rather turn a blind eye and do nothing. I asked the Government how the Scottish Government monitors and enforces compliance with existing regulations for park home sites. Presiding Officer, basically they don't. They just devolve all responsibility to our under-resourced local authorities. So this Government have declared a housing emergency, and park homes can play a big part in helping address this emergency. But we need proper protections and regulations in place. The ideal chance to have this put in place is the upcoming housing bill. This bill could put legal protections in place. This bill could set out a conflict resolution process. The bill could set out rights that park homeowners could expect from site owners. But the bill doesn't do any of that. It's like these homes and their owners just don't exist. And I urge the Minister to come with me and meet residents, and he can tell them why this devolved government doesn't care about their rights. He can tell them why he's content with turning a blind eye while there are rogue site operators operating. Minister, it's not too late. Listen to the issues, work with SCOFRA and make sure the housing bill works for all homeowners and end this discrimination against park home owners. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Lumsden. And I now call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I too congratulate Murdo Fraser for securing today's debate and, as Willie Rennie said, opening the debate with great authority, with great knowledge of this subject, but also proposing solutions, because often government ministers accuse the opposition of complaining about things but not coming up with potential solutions to the issues. And I think we will discuss that later on with the Minister's response and hopefully next week with the housing bill. I will be focusing just on one point my contribution, but I do want to acknowledge what others have said. Oliver Mundell was right to say that while there is a great interest in many of our constituencies and regions, and this is something that I've dealt with both in this chamber and in the UK Parliament, some people are concerned about their names being mentioned in these debates or even in correspondence to the Minister because of fear of repercussions from site owners. I would also say, and I'm not often the one that inserts balance into debates, there are some site owners who are very good. They are sometimes, sadly, in the minority of site owners, but I do have examples of some who went to great lengths during the recent cold snap we had in Murray, where the site owner and his staff were out clearing the pavements for elderly and disabled residents and ramps into their homes. So I think that is something that's important to get on record. But sadly, there is a significant number who are not acting in the best interests of the owners in their parks. And Murdo Fraser was also right to say these parks are extremely welcoming, as Douglas Lumsden pointed out as well. Many people come to Murray and the Highlands because they like the location, but also the sites themselves look extremely appealing from the outside, and you can understand why many people want to retire and move there. But the issue I want to focus on was briefly mentioned by Kenny Gibson, and that's about the Commission on sales of these properties. And I wrote to the Minister earlier this month, and I got a very prompt response from him. This is the issue where owners have to provide 10% commission to the site owners when they sell their property. And I accept that everyone knows this when they buy their property in the first place, but I do think we have to look to see if this is still now a reasonable cost for people to have to pay when they want to sell their home. Now, the Minister nodded when Kenny Gibson explained some of the reasons why this remains in place, but the Scottish Government did do a consultation in 2011 on this topic, and the split was right down the middle. The site owners and their representatives want the Commission to be maintained, and the homeowners oppose it. So at some point, we are not going to please both sides, but we have to decide, do we want to keep supporting the site owners who like this income, or do we want to respond more to the concerns of the homeowners? Because in that consultation, residents groups said the Commission is not directly related to the services provided. And I think this is an important point that came across in that consultation. It provides an incentive for unscrupulous site owners to harass residents into selling to maximise profits. That's why I think this is something that does need to be looked into. The Scottish Government previously did a review onto the wider impacts of this in 2013. Looking at the Spice briefing, I was surprised that the UK Parliament, looking at this now in England, haven't considered a change since I was born. So my entire life, the last change was in 1983 when the Commission went from 15% to 10%. Surely now, 12 years on from the Scottish Government's last review and over 4 decades since the UK Parliament looked at this, this is now the right time to consider if that Commission is still right, and certainly if it should be set at 10%. Finally, Presiding Officer, can I say many of these members' business debates are often consensual, and I think we've had that today. And often we get from the Minister in his response that they will go away and look into things, but it can be weeks, months and sometimes years before action is taken. With this debate, we have a real opportunity in days, this time next week, to make some of the important changes that Murdo Fraser has suggested in his amendments, and I hope they will be considered positively by the Government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call on the Minister, Paul McLennan, to respond to the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank Mr Fraser for proposing this debate and members for their contributions. I think they've been very important and come forward with some of the solutions. Mr Fraser and I have met previously on this issue, and he's got my commitment, as well as meeting next week to talk about the bill, to meet again and to discuss that. Also met SCOPRA representatives as well. So you've got my commitment to ongoing discussions around about that. Residential mobile homes are, of course, an important housing option, and we've heard that from a few members saying that today, often for people who want to downsize and enjoy the lifestyle that a park home can offer in retirement. I think we've heard today there's around about 100 sites in Scotland, and we've heard from many members that have got park homes in their own particular constituencies. So everyone has a right to a safe and secure home, and we're committed, obviously, to making sure that those living in permanent mobile home sites have appropriate rights and protection. And I'll go into a wee bit more detail on some of these things that we're talking about. Obviously, it's been mentioned about the Mobile Homes Act 1983 and the Caravan Sites Act, which we kind of touched on as well, in 1968. The Mobile Homes Act 1983 set out implied terms that are automatically included in every contract between a permanent resident and a site owner. And one of the key things I've heard today, of course, is around about that written statement and how much that has been, I suppose,
how definitively that's been between residents and tenants in that particular point. And the 1968 Act protects residents against eviction and harassment. The second is the licensing of mobile home site providers. And I think this is one of the key things that I've kind of heard all the way through this as well. And one of the key things I'm going to do on the back of this today is write to all local authorities to remind them of the powers that they have. And we've heard around about a fit and proper person being mentioned by a few times. Yeah, of course.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention. One of my concerns is that a lot of this sits with environmental health at the moment, and there are good individuals working in that space, but they don't necessarily have the experience or knowledge, and they don't have housing expertise. Would the Minister look at that when he's contacting authorities?
Minister? Yeah, I thank Mr Mundell for that question. I think that's a very valid point. It's just in terms of not just reminding them of what their obligations are, but in terms of how they're actually implementing that as well. It's fine having the powers, but to have the ability to implement them, and I think that's really important in terms of that. So the licensing thing, the licensing part of this is really, really important. And of course, the licence system came in 2019. It provides local authorities with a range of powers that we've talked about to manage and ultimately revoke site licences to sites that have received planning permission for residential use. And I think a few members had discussed the issue, particularly about COVID, about homes that had been, park homes that had been sold and obviously been misrepresented in terms that I remember a few cases where a few constituents came to me and were in the same situation. They were told they had to move out for a period of time and weren't aware of that right at the start. That hadn't been described at the start. So that's something we have to try and obviously make sure that we eradicate as well. So the Scottish Government provided model standards for local authorities to take into account in setting licensing conditions, and of course guidance to help in operation of licence systems and provide a degree of consistency. And the point that Mr Mundell made is a really important point in terms of that. And of course, in addition, mobile homes are a consumer purchase, and caravan park owners and operators are subject to consumer protection legislation. So it's important to keep protections under review, and we're taking action to do this. Again, we talked around about pitch fee increases, and that's obviously regulated by the Mobile Homes Act 1983, so they do not increase by more than RPI. We've listened to concerns from residents that the gap between RPI and CPI has been greater in recent years, with the effect that pitch fees are growing faster than pensions income. The current housing bill, and I'll come on to that in a little second, includes a proposal to update inflation rate in the Mobile Homes Act 83 to CPI. As RPI is typically above CPI, we expect to see a slow rate of increase in pitch fees once the change comes into force. We're also committed to undertaking a post-implementation review of the residential homes site licensing scheme before the end of this Parliament, as been referred to by a few members as well. And I think what we've heard today in the debate, obviously, I think will be part of that discussion and how we take some of these problems forward. The review, of course, will consider the issues raised about the operation of the scheme to date. However, I think that I'm aware of obviously ongoing concerns by residents and obviously highlighted by members today. I've heard directly concerns from Scopra. I've also have a mobile home site in my own constituency. So I know there can be issues in sites, and what we've heard today is issues that I've heard from constituents in my own area. I've met with Scopra before, and I said happy to meet with Scopra and Mr Fraser or anybody else kind of going forward out with the bill discussions that we've had. There's a few specific points that I want to kind of come in and address at that moment. Colin Beattie, I want to thank him for his work that he's carried out before in terms of that. He mentioned around about adaptations and obviously around about Ofgem. And I'm going to come to kind of summarise some of these issues as well. Graham Day obviously mentioned about local authorities and their role in terms of that as well. Oliver Mundell obviously talked about site licensing and about mis-selling. And again, I'll come on to the site licensing. Faisal Chowdhury talked around about, I think, talking about some of the issues around about storms and what's happened again that. And again, I'll touch on what we're kind of looking at in terms of that as well. And I thank other members, obviously, for the points that they've raised. But I'll kind of come on to more of the points in terms of that. There are specific few points, I think, that were mentioned in terms of, obviously, the licence scheme. I've talked around about what we're planning to do that. One of the key things as well is obviously around about the energy. So I'm going to contact, one of the actions I'm going to take away today is obviously contact Ofgem around about that. There are certain rules and regulations around about that the site licences, site owners should be operating to in terms of that. So that's something I'm going to take away and write to Ofgem, and happy to share with Mr Fraser on the back of that also going forward. I think that's really important. So there is guidance from Ofgem in that particular time around about site owners only selling at a price paid per unit of energy, and obviously the standing charge. So site owners cannot profit from charges made to residents. So obviously that's something I'm going to write to Ofgem in terms of that going forward today. I think there's a few other things just I want to mention as well. We talked about adaptations. Local authorities have a duty to ensure the needs of disabled residents, whatever their housing circumstances, are met and offer to support under the provisions of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act 1970. We plan to take a review, as has been mentioned, of the current housing adaptation system, which will make recommendations on how best to improve and streamline the system and better target resources. So as yeah, of course.
Dr Slimson.
I thank the Minister for taking an intervention. In terms of the adaptations, do you think that's something within the housing bill that could be changed to allow park home residents, who still will pay council tax to local authorities, just like everyone else, to have those adaptations made just like other residents?
Minister.
As previously mentioned, as Mr Fraser and I are discussing his amendments in the bill, and again I think that will be one issue that we'll pick up and discuss how we can look at these in terms of that. For that, I think there's a number of other things. I think there's obviously recognising concerns about mis-selling, and that's a very insignificant impact it can have in individuals, and we've heard what the similar cases have kind of come through. Consumer protection policy and advocacy and advice are devolved to the Scottish Government, and we promote services to residents locally in terms of that. Redress and, of course, enforcement are reserved to the UK Government, so we are limited by the action it takes in this area. That might be something I can take away and write to my UK equivalent on that particular matter. Obviously, on access to justice, we're keen to support residents, and I continue to listen to the views that we coming through in terms from constituents, but also in the debate today. So residents can get support from Advice Direct Scotland and Trading Standards. Issues about site licensing can obviously be raised about the local authority, and we've touched about that as well in terms of that. Mr Fraser and I will be discussing around about the issue around about transferring disputes under the Mobile Homes Act 1983 from the Sheriff Court to the First Tier Tribunal. And as I said, Mr Fraser has laid an amendment, and we'll be discussing that next week. In relation to the 10% commission chargeable under the implied terms which govern the sale of a home, research in England has kind of suggested that a reduction can impact on the viability of smaller parks. But the point that Mr Ross made, I think, is a very important point. We've got to try and strike that balance. Of course, it's around about the viability of the park, but it's about protecting residents in terms of that as well. So finally, Presiding Officer, I want to thank Murdo Fraser for bringing the debate forward today. For members, which I think has been a very consensual debate, commends SCOPRA for its support to residents. Look forward to meeting them again. In terms, I also thank them for their proactive and collaborative work with stakeholders and work with Scottish Government, for example, in meetings with the Law Society and feeding back on licensing issues to local authorities. Pleased to be able to contribute to SCOPRA's conference last year, and I look forward to meeting Mr Fraser later this week, and obviously working with SCOPRA in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m. Thank you.